Okay, hello, my name is Rob Wright and I'm an associate fiction editor for Able Muse Press and the author of the poetry collection Last Wishes, published by Able Muse. I'd like to welcome everyone to this May 2002 Able Muse authors book launch and reading for three wonderful writers. Brian Culhane, whose poetry collection Remembering Lethe is now available from Able Muse Press. William Baer, author of New Jersey Noir, Barnegat Light, which will be released on September 2nd of this year by Able Muse. And Richard Wakefield, whose poetry collection Terminal Park is currently available from Able Muse Press. I'll be introducing Alex Pepple, founder of Able Muse Press, in a moment. But before I do, I'd like to let you know how I'd like to proceed today. The audience will be muted for each of our authors' readings. Then at the end of each reading, please feel free to unmute yourself to show your appreciation. Brian Culhane will read first, followed by William Baer. The final reader will be Richard Wakefield. We'll then open the floor for questions and comments. Feel free to use the chat box provided by the Zoom program for any comments you'd like to make during the reading, but I'd like to let the writers have a chance to read before we open the floor for general questions, answers, and discussions. Thanks so much for coming today. Let me say it's an honor to be here among such distinguished writers and company, and let me now introduce Alex. Alex Pepple founded and edits the Able Muse and Able Muse Press, and also founded and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. His poetry and prose have been or will be published in Barrow Street, Hopkins Review, Rosebud, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Think Journal, Ephony, Per Contra, Eclectia, Measure, and elsewhere. He edited the Able Muse anthology, Able Muse Press 2010. And here's Alex.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, and it's good to see all of you here. Your lovely virtual faces, or blacked out virtual faces, as it is. I'm glad that we have three very distinguished and awarded poets and writers reading today. Brian, Richard, and Bill. And the good thing is they all have brand new books, which I'm sure some of you probably already have. If not, I exhort you to go and get their books and after the reading. And I have some links in the chat where you can see their home pages and other links to Able Muse Press. Notably, I'll mention that we have our open submission period still going on right now. For Able Muse, the magazine itself, we still have submissions open till July 15th. And you can find that out by just going to ablemuse.com and follow the links. Or for the Able Muse Press itself, we also have our open reading period for manuscripts there. And that is, go to ablemusepress.com and you should find the rest there. And that is open till July 15 as well. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Rob. And Rob, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And I'm going to mute everyone right now, as I said. And I'd ask Brian to unmute himself before the reading, and first I will introduce him. Brian Culhane's poetry has appeared in such journals as The New Republic, the Hudson Review, the Paris Review, the New Criterion, and Plume. In 2007, he was awarded the Poetry Foundation Emily Dickinson First Book Prize for King's Question, which was published by Grey Wolf Press. Remembering Lethe, which you will read from today, is his second poetry collection. Born and raised in New York City, Brian attended City University of New York and Columbia University's writing program. He received his doctorate in English literature from the University of Washington, where he studied epic literature and the history of criticism. A recipient of fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Artist Trust of Washington State. He also lectured on Robert Frost and Henry David Thoreau for Humanities Washington. For 25 years, he taught film studies and English literature at Seattle's Lakeside School. Now retired, Brian and his wife, Victoria, divide their time between homes in Seattle and New York. Please welcome Brian Culhane.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Alex, for being such a wonderful editor. I really appreciated all the work you did on my volume, which is this one. I don't know if you can see that. There it is. So the title, Remembering Lethe, refers to the mythological, Greek mythological river in the underworld that conferred on the souls who drank from it a forgetting so that they could be reincarnated with a blank slate. And so it's a bit of a paradox, that title. It also refers, at least the title poem does, to my mother's forgetting. She had dementia, and eventually she forgot my name when I came to visit her. So that has a personal aspect to it as well. I'd like to begin the reading by first saying hi to my fellow readers. I'm a fan of your work, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. First poem I'll read is called The Essay. I was a recipient of many essays over the years, having taught for a long time. And I always wondered what it would be like to have students write on a theme that kind of offered them the chance to speculate, maybe existentially, rather than talk about Henry David Thoreau and Walden Pond and that sort of thing. This essay has no question really in it, and the poem kind of follows that theme. There is one couple of things I'd like to say about it first, and that is it mentions Kafka's Diaries, and I don't know whether people have read them, but if you get a volume of his, I think they come in 2 volumes, and if you get a volume of his diaries, you'll see that he had very odd, kind of strange, nightmarish, humorous stick figures that he drew in the margins, sometimes odd things like clocks, and that shows up in the poem. Also, there's a word there that kind of confuses some readers, and that's the word psychopomp. And that's a word for the conductor of dead souls. So Virgil uses that in the Aeneid. Dante uses that in the figure. Actually, he has Virgil in Dante's Inferno lead the pilgrim through hell. So that's my pedantic side note. So this is the essay. I've asked my students once again to write on a theme. The subject is not the end of the summer, though summer has once again ended, and they are here. The subject is not even the coming of autumn or the Shakespearean sonnet's use of the couplet. No, theirs is such a dark and rich theme that their essays will look at first like Kafka's Diaries, with self-portraits, wraiths, and ominous clocks lodged in the margins. I want each to follow the footsteps of the psychopomp and find the gates of horn where so many have stood before. Should they be frightened, the pure ether may calm them, moving over their hot foreheads with a mother's touch. I watch them bend low to their work, smudging ink, capitalizing proper nouns, stopping only to hurry forward, their nibs heavy oars, their scribbling and uneasy rowing. The dread of conclusions scrunches their shoulders. One girl, wearing her hair up for the very first time, raises her hand and, at my nod, walks up to my desk. She has finished first. Her paragraphs have the weight of Etruscan tombs, and her face is that same shade of rose that glimmers in the background of Pompeian frescoes. I accept that her script is cuneiform, and that a grave puzzle awaits my midnight's musing. For hers is the lost language of the young, a smooth stone I weigh in my palm and let go. The second poem I'll read is titled Monody, with a line from Rupert Brooke. Rupert Brooke is a well-known poet, died in World War I of fever, buried on a Greek island. And I happened to be opening his selected poems and came across the following line: "They say that the dead die not, but remain." And for some reason that struck me as an interesting line, and it became, as I wrote the poem around it, a refrain. So this is a monody with a line from Rupert Brooke. The word monody is a kind of an old-fashioned word meaning an elegy or a dirge. The word also has in it mono, meaning one, right? So it has the idea of a poem sung by one person. So here's the poem. It's only the wind tapping on the pane. No words, nothing whispered, no news. They say that the dead die not, but remain. Boulevards glisten in freezing rain. Back and forth walk ones and twos. It's only the wind tapping on the pane. The dog looks up from where she's lain. A screech crisscrosses slick avenues. They say that the dead die not, but remain. But what can the living hope to gain? Hear that sound? The scuffle of shoes. Oh, only the wind tapping on the pane. Sleet and more sleet, tonight's refrain, a sound no one willingly would choose. They say that the dead die not, but remain. The dog whispers over and over again, no words, nothing, no news. They say that the dead die not, but remain. It's only the wind tapping on the pane. It's actually a poem as well inspired by a wonderful lyric by Edward Arlington Robinson called "The House on the Hill," and I highly recommend that to you. So the next poem is called the Dante Dictionary. It's actually a book. It's a dictionary. And the story of how I got it is actually kind of, it's a story of serendipity. I happened to be visiting my friend Susan in her farm in New Hampshire, and she was cleaning out an old barn. And a relative had hoarded away some marvelous books, but put them in kind of the siding of the barn or inside with the hay and things. And she had located this incredible treasure trove. And when I visited, I stepped into the barn, and she had put all of these lovely old books, old volumes out. Some of them had been eaten by rats, but many of them had been preserved. And one of them was this dictionary by Toynbee, written in 1899, a dictionary of proper names, and he calls important matters in Dante's writing. And I looked at it lovingly, and she was so kind as to give it to me. So this is the poem that resulted from that. I knew as soon as I held the book that I was going to write a poem about it. I mentioned in the poem the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, who were these factions, perhaps you might remember, fighting at the time in medieval Italy that Dante was living, and he was caught up in the fighting. I think he was born a white Guelph, but I could be wrong. So. the Dante Dictionary. I take down my copy of the Dante Dictionary and look up the names of those put in hell. I read column after column, turning pages, scouring their sins. Each arcane history, each infinitesimal internecine feud, Guelph and Ghibelline, back and forth over 63 years. What human drama. Like that sinner who gives the figs to God, his finger crammed into the hole made by opposing thumb and forefinger. I look him up, Vanni Fucci, whose carcass eternally rises phoenix-like from its own ash. Noosed around his neck, a serpent, for he stole, he admits, from the treasury of San Jacopo. Unrepentant still, he ignites among the robbers. Dante says the serpent's sting turns his flesh instantly to ash, faster than any O or I were ever written by the hand of man. And Vanni, to him, to be seen in this state by you is worse by far than any death. What makes it so? Mere embarrassment? The dictionary does not say. His entry ends with Vulcan's son, one Cacus, a centaur, wildly cantering over to punish him. I must find out why this crazed centaur is also stung to ash by the fangs of snakes. But that's for another evening's study, another myth, another fuming revenant. It's late. Time to close this learned book with its whiffs of burnt clothing, its far-off battle cries, its red-letter dates. So unlike my own view of the afterlife, which I picture looking like the Hudson in November, that stretch on Riverside Drive where a lone runner used to pass me at dawn without so much as a wave of her hand. The fourth poem I'd like to read is called Just Before or Right After the Fall of Rome. Gibbon famously put the fall of Rome 476. Later historians, see it as a much longer process. And this poem is sort of a thought experiment. What if we could localize in time the fall of Rome in a particular moment? What would be the moments right before it and right after it? So hence this poem. Just before or right after the fall of Rome. Lately, I have been thinking again of the fall of imperial Rome. Not the fall itself, not that precise moment, but the preceding hours, even minutes, of which few reports survive. Recall it took weeks to break through the main aqueducts, axes and picks in rolling shifts, as well as the minutes in the immediate aftermath about which more is known, though much remains speculation, a piecing together of wild tales as out from hemlock forests, legionnaires staggered, unhorsed, purblind, not realizing that they had truly lived past a date every schoolboy knows, or used to know, history not being what it once was. Just before or right after, when a girl could be found still humming in her bath, a sprig of thyme wilting on a table, a pile of decrees burnt in the forum, the word for surrender mispronounced. That's what's most alluring, the hours, minutes just before and right after the catastrophe, when something important, even life-changing, seems so imminent and then not, almost here, then nearly gone. Like so much of our lives, the mere seconds before and after with talk of battering rams, dragonflies, small beer, whirring endlessly and then not, no sooner predicted than lamented, waiting for some wry Gibbon to remark on page 753 that such and such killed so-and-so, or was killed by so-and-so, who then slipped on the Senate steps and became a nobody in the eye of history, in the eye of the whirlwind, whose Gorgon pupil opens wide and admits no wrong. Medusa was one of the Gorgons, by the way. There were 3 sisters. Pleasant family reunion, right? How are your snakes doing? Oh, they're great. The title poem, Remembering Lethe, as I mentioned in my introduction, refers to my mother as well as to the mythological river in the underworld. And I've always been fascinated by Greek mythology ever since taking classes at college. I had a wonderful teacher, Professor Granjuan, who taught art history of the ancient world. And she loved to introduce us to such figures as the Critios boy, who had a kind of an Egyptian element to him, very expressionless. And he enters the poem as well. There's a story also a bit about the ending of the poem. I published it originally in Plume, and I was always unsatisfied with the ending. Poets are almost always unsatisfied with elements of their poems, but for this particular poem, it really bothered me. But I didn't know what to do about it. And then I was reading the Irish poet Avon Boland's collected works. She recently died, one of the great poets. And it struck me as I was reading poems she wrote about her mother and her father, that what my poem lacked is heart. And I hadn't really connected my feelings about my mother to the poem. And I quickly went to my typewriter and wrote the last 4 stanzas. Remembering Lethe. Yesterday, a friend wrote, "So many of your poems are about ancient facts, names. I don't know those references, but nonetheless, I think what you do admirable." Not to be understood is admirable if seen in a certain light, a way of keeping up one's old illusions. Hardly what my teenage self had sought to wrap mind around during lectures on the Greek nude, when slides taught me to embrace new embodiments of grace and see why, expressionless and wooden, the Critios boy is beautiful. How was I to know that those deep images from my school days would be so crucial decades on? How before I'd ever climbed Delphi's crags, a vision of Delphi was to capture me so wholly I could almost taste the fumes that wound from the sacred fissure at whose lip the priestess knelt to suck in the upwelling god. My son once asked me the name of that river in Hades said to make the newly dead lose memory. Lethe? Lethe, I think. In her last year, my mother gazed at me and saw no son, but her former husband. "James, come up here." She motioned to the bed she lay on, and I answered with a stricken no. "No," she said, "I want you up here." I don't know why the scene fades, an unbridgeable gulf. And what did we do afterwards? Probably a wheelchair outing in the home's garden, where she smiled at roses with the look of one who had known names for this, sinking into sleep. Did she understand she'd stay in that place? Or how finally a phone would waken her sons with wished-for, dreaded news, leading to a dawn flight toward frayed robes, unworn slippers? Well, we would all be better off for a dip in Lethe water to ward off the cold when the cold comes. In a file, I've kept my son's crayon drawing of the souls gathered by the riverside. Their ferryman, just a brown scribble bobbing next to stick figures on the bank, ready for their mythic entrance in some long ago show and tell. If I touch her absence now, it's in stories I almost hear. As falling asleep, I dream of riverbed's weeds thrust and catch at the hem of memory, a cloak unraveling unspooled. Here, mother, take my hand again, the way you used to on our way to wherever we were headed, when I would look up at you in wordlessly in tongue-tied love. And you were so young too, and childhoods we shared, mine in your keeping, and yours as we settled on the bed, your warming voice joining years when I was just your age, making us almost playmates together. Though finally you would have to stand up and re-enter your world, leaving me on the riverbank, child no more, seeing your shadow cross into light. The last poem of the book will be my second to last poem. I got the title, and which is the refrain of the poem. The first line was the last to be written. I got it from an interview of a poet whose name escapes me. But in the interview, he said, in talking about how he wrote a particular poem, he said the first line was the last to be written. And I thought, that sounds pentametric. And I counted it out, and sure enough, it was. So I wrote the following poem rather quickly. The first line was the last to be written. Ash in the fireplace, first to be stirred. Apples in the bowl, last to be bitten. Waters in the mountains, first to be heard. The first line was the last to be written. Frost lay white on the wintering herd. The first wool made the last child's mitten. The last pen wrote, the purring cat purred. On the open page, the last word written. Next to the lamp, the opening word. Last season's apples yet to be bitten. Far from the tumult first to be heard. The last page was the first to be written. Waters in the mountains, oh, very cold. Ash in the fireplace, wool under kitten. On the open page, the last word is told. The first line was the last to be given. Ash in the fireplace, first to be stirred. Peace in the capital, last to be riven. On the open page, the purring cat purred. Well, for my last poem, I'd like to read a poem that is not in the book. It's one that I recently wrote. Actually, it's called Forgetting. And I woke up one day after dreaming about writing, and I recollected as I woke this opening line, which is learning is hard, but forgetting harder. And I went to my desk and wrote out the following poem, whose theme is the forgetting that is attendant upon one's senior years. Forgetting. Learning is hard, but forgetting harder. Retired now, I tend to miss calling the day by its right name. Then something, the radio or a school bus, corrects me, and a Thursday will come whirling into being, vivid as Thor's hammer. Yesterday, I think it was, I held metal in my hand. Spoon, I said aloud, half smiling to its averted face. You know you've come a long way in life when you stand barefoot on a cold kitchen floor, looking at a spoon for an answer. Thank you.
Hey,
Really?
thanks. Okay, I'm not echoing now. Okay, we show your appreciation and we can move on to the next reader.
Lovely.
Unmute yourselves and feel free.
Terrific. Terrific.
Okay. All right. I'm going to mute you all now and introduce the next reader. The next reader is William Baer. And William Baer has been the recipient of a Fulbright, a Guggenheim, and a Creative Writing Fellowship in Fiction from the National Endowments for the Arts. He's a graduate of Rutgers, NYU, South Carolina, Johns Hopkins, the USC School of Cinema, where he received the Jack Nicholson Screenwriting Award. He's the author of 25 books, including 4 novels, 2 collections of short stories, and 7 collections of poetry. His novels include 2 previous books in the Jack Colt Murder Mystery series published by Able Muse Press. Publishers Weekly, in a 5-star review, described the second Jack Colt novel, New Jersey Noir, Cape May, as a "I can't put it down" thrill ride. Please welcome William Baer.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. This will be quite a change of pace from Brian's very intelligent and beautiful poems. It is a great pleasure to be reading this afternoon with such talented poets as Brian and Richard. And of course, I'd also like to thank our extraordinary publisher and editor, Alex Pepple. So this is the new novel. I'll hold it up in front of my face. It's called New Jersey Noir, Barnegat Light, and it has a cover that I love very much that was designed and created by Alex. The new book is a standalone sequel and the 3rd novel in the Jack Colt murder mystery series published by Able Muse Press. Like the 2 previous books, Barnegat Light is a contemporary hard-boiled mystery featuring tough guy detective Jack Colt, who is a direct descendant of Samuel Colt, who began his gun-making days in Paterson, New Jersey. Jack lives in equally tough Paterson, New Jersey, in a stone house on top of Garrett Mountain, which overlooks the city. So this afternoon, I'll just read a bit from the opening. Section 1 begins with a quote from Jack's mentor, his deceased great uncle, Thomas Colt. Quote, "New Jersey is the only state where the politicians are more corrupt than the mob." Thomas C. Colt. Chapter 1, Brownstone, Tuesday, May 10th. Paterson elected a new mayor tonight, a murderer, trust me. Meredith Hopkins, 27, mayor-elect, got 72% of the vote against 6 other hapless candidates. Did I mention that she's the daughter of the governor? Maybe that helped a bit, along with a ton of outside money. Tonight, she's celebrating at the Brownstone on West Broadway, sipping champagne, surrounded by a million sycophants in the grand ballroom, beneath 4 chandeliers. I wasn't there. I was at home, sitting on my couch, watching Jaws and rooting for the shark. A few years ago, we went on 2 dates, me and Meredith, both dumbass mistakes on my part before she started killing people. She was raised right here in beautiful Paterson, back when her old man was the sitting mayor. She was irredeemably spoiled by both of her parents, both of whom she naturally detests, along with her bratty little sister, who was psychopathically damaged, now deceased, whom she also detested. Having said all that, there's no denying that Meredith is smart, ambitious, articulate, and attractive. Very. Eddie Ravello once took a look at her and said, "That one's hotter than Sunstroke." So I gave him a look. So we rephrased, "That's a very lovely young lady." I never cared for all that hot crap, even when the women say it, about guys, about other women. I'm not fond of sexy either. So I guess I'm a prude, but I doubt anybody will call me on it. My Uncle Tom raised me to respect women unless they're pointing a weapon in your face. Eddie, by the way, was the youngest son of Don Ravello, and Meredith had him assassinated a year ago, not because he called her hot, for other reasons. I knew it, the cops knew it, the troopers knew it, the feds knew it. But she spent less than 2 hours in jail, made bail, and then, as she was waiting for the charges to get dropped, she decided to run for mayor. Paterson mayors typically go to jail after they've been elected, at least 2 in the last decades, mostly for the usual Jersey stuff, kickbacks, extortion, corruption, etc. I'm told she wore a slinky red Versace tonight, slit down to her navel. I'm exaggerating, of course. I'm sure Meredith looked, as they say, perfectly stunning. Tallish, long glossy jet brown hair, Atlantic blue eyes with, I'm certain, the reddest red lipstick on her red lips. Tomorrow, all the reports will say she looked breathtaking, elegant, maybe even classy. She mingled with the crowd, hobnobbing, celebrating, sucking in the endless compliments, the fawning, the obsequiousness, occasionally chatting about nothing much with Governor Hopkins and his ever popular First Lady, so proud of their high maintenance psychopathic daughter. Eventually, things wound down. The ass kissers started peeling off and the ballroom was mostly empty. Slightly drunk, Meredith left the Brownstone with her 2 assistants and her 2 bodyguards, one of whom, or both, were surely a boy toy for later tonight. They exited into a magnificent Paterson night, a bit cool but perfect. Muscle boy number 1 opened the back door of her huge black limo. Meredith was triumphant, on top of the world, the mayor of the great city of Paterson, New Jersey. As she turned to speak to muscle boy number 1, a shot rang out. Instead of perforating her heart, it cracked through the bones in her right shoulder. Terrified, she immediately dropped down behind the limo as the 2 subsequent shots rang out as each of her bodyguards slumped to the floor of the alley. Then she did the inexplicable. She pulled out her phone. Guess who she called? Me. Roy Scheider is sitting on the beach and he sees the damn thing in the water. Then Spielberg, imitating Hitchcock, does a perfect dolly zoom facing the police captain. It's a great shot, which was now being interrupted by an irritating phone call. I hit pause and answered my cell. This better be good. Jack. I'd know that voice anywhere, even on the beach on Amity Island with the shark loose in the water. Instead, it was another kind of shark, but she sounded different tonight, somehow off, probably drunk, maybe calling to gloat. Her Honor, the mayor. She clicked off. I pushed it out of my mind. I was enjoying the movie, relaxing. I was, dare I use the word, happy, as I usually am, although no one seems to notice. It might surprise you to know that New Jersey is one of the happiest states in the Union, number 6, in fact. Minnesota is number 1, but I think I'll stay right where I am. A few years ago, Wallet Hub did a huge national survey based on 28 key metrics. In the emotional and physical well-being category, New Jersey was 3rd. Hawaii was 1st, Arkansas was last. Also of interest, in the lowest share of adult depression, Jersey was 2nd, again trailing Hawaii with Oregon as the worst. What the hell's going on up there in Oregon? Jersey was also number 2 in lowest suicide rate and number 3 in lowest divorce rate. Come to New Jersey and be happy. We need more traffic congestion. We need more people to overtax. I fired up Jaws again. Later, just before Scheider shoves the scuba tank down the shark's throat, I'd shifted alliances by now. The phone rang again. Pause again. What do you want? Hey, Grumpy. It was my best friend, Lucas Salerno, who was also chief detective at the Paterson courthouse. The shark's about to get blown to smithereens, I explained. Understanding my frustrations, Luca got right to the point. Meredith Hopkins was shot dead tonight outside the Brownstone. I didn't know what to say. Luca continued. I guess the Ravellos took care of business. I've thought it over. You want to come and look, he wondered? Now, sit this one out. He understood. We hung up. I don't wish people dead. but some deserve it more than others. Chapter 2, Pines Lake, Tuesday, May 10th, and this is the same night, just later. I raced through the upscale section of upscale Pines Lake, not far from the Laurelwood Arboretum, then pulled up in front of a large, isolated white brick colonial. The front door was, the front door was open. When I stepped inside the living room, the judge was hanging from the two-story vaulted ceiling. Beneath him, a pretty young woman was sitting on the floor, stunned, distraught. She looked up at me. It was a very sad face, but a beautiful one. She was wearing a dark green dress that looked black in the dimly lit room. Her shoes were off. She had big hair and very thick and black, yet perfectly in place. She also had wet sorrow eyes and wet disbelieving lips. In my racket, given my cinema background, I always make snap judgments about who people look like. It comes in handy. The best I could do was the young Gabrielle Union. She nodded across the room at the interior hallway. There's more. Don't move, I said. Down in the basement, she mumbled. About 20 minutes ago, around midnight, I got my third interruption. Scheider and Dreyfus had just done their business and they were swimming towards shore. I used to hate the water, Scheider said. The phone rang. I picked it up. Why not? Yeah? The voice was urgent. This is Savannah Garvey. My father told me to call you if I ever needed help. It was clear that she needed help right now. Where are you? She told me, and I came immediately. Her old man, now hanging from the ceiling, was one of the most respected judges in Passaic County. Once a liberal councilman in Wayne, he'd become a hard-ass judge in Patterson. I'd only had a few dealings with the guy, but I liked him, and so did my Uncle Tom. I walked across the living room into a lighted hallway, then followed a trail of blood deep inside the huge house. Eventually, I came to a large, reinforced, open doorway leading down to a basement. The blood continued down the stairs. The room down below was lit. Off in the far corner of the room, there was a cell. Yes, a jail cell with iron bars, with a dead man lying inside. A smallish man who'd obviously been shot several times. I won't bother to describe all the blood. Outside the cell, there was another dead man, much younger, in a guard's uniform with a holstered weapon and a bullet hole in his forehead. Why was a distinguished judge hanging by the neck in his living room? It's a fair question, but stuff like that happens all the time. More curiously, why has he got a prison cell in his basement? And why is there a guy inside? And why is there some kind of guard? And why are they both dead? I like mysteries. I guess that's obvious given my profession, but this one was a good bit weirder than most, which I liked a lot. I went back upstairs, sat on the living room couch, and dialed the Wayne police. The judge's daughter crawled onto the couch, put her head in my lap, and held me tight. We waited for the cops as I kept thinking about that old film by Juan Jose Campanella, The Secret in Their Eyes. Chapter 3, Barnegat, Wednesday, May 11th, and this is the next day in Jackson's office. There's an odd-looking person asking to see you. It was the ever-soothing voice of Mrs. Doris Salerno, screeching through my intercom, obviously insulting a potential client who was sitting a few feet away from her in the reception room. Mrs. S., Nana, was Luca's 73-year-old grandmother, a former librarian who's been helping me out both as a researcher and a receptionist ever since my, how shall I put it, girlfriend packed her possessions into her little red Neon and drove as far away from me as possible last year to California. Actually, she's kind of cute. She says she's with the FBI, but she looks like she's with the Girl Scouts. I tried not to laugh at the rudeness of my rude receptionist. Send her in so I can buy some cookies and get rid of her. I guess I'm a bit rude myself. So what? It's New Jersey. Get used to it. Besides, I don't care for the feds. I'd spent the morning with the local cops in Wayne, most of whom I liked and knew well. Now I was sitting in my office, hoping not to be disturbed. I'm sure you're wondering what I was doing. So I'll stop there. It turns out that the federal agent's sister was brutally murdered the previous day at the Barnegat Lighthouse, a very famous lighthouse at the New Jersey shore, which is actually on a lot of our license plates. So Colt decides to take on both cases, the hanging of Judge Garvey and the murder at the shore, despite remembering what his uncle had once told him, quote, "Only an idiot takes two cases at the same time." Thank all of you for listening in today. I really appreciate it, and thanks again.
Thanks so much, William, for your reading, and please unmute yourselves and show your appreciation.
Terrific. Another one, terrific. That's great.
Okay, now I am going to mute everyone and introduce Richard Wakefield. Richard Wakefield has taught college humanities for 43 years. For over 25 years, he reviewed poetry and fiction for the Seattle Times. His articles on American art and literature have appeared in many publications. Among other prizes and honors, his poetry has won the Richard Wilbur Award and the Howard Nemerov Sonnet Award, and has been shortlisted for the Poets Prize. His new collection, Terminal Park, from which you will read today, has just been released by Able Muse Press. He and his wife, Catherine, have been married for 48 years and have 2 daughters, 2 sons-in-law, and 2 grandchildren. Please welcome Richard Wakefield.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you, of course, to Alex for arranging this and for doing such a wonderful, putting so much work, so much creativity into this production, Terminal Park. I'm also pleased that William Baer is with us today because William was the editor of my very first book, East of Early Winters, back in, I believe, 2006. So it's a double pleasure. The title poem of this collection, Terminal Park, derives from an actual place. You wouldn't think Terminal Park would be a particularly attractive name for a vacation spot, but in fact, there is such a place. I think the poem makes it clear why why the name actually makes some sense. Terminal Park, reads the vine-covered sign where junkies and drunks reach the end of the line. Come morning, the coroner's van threads its way through under and overgrowth gone to decay. But this was a park once, the sweet countryside, a Sunday adventure where people would ride in the days of the streetcar, away from the grime and the stench of the city, both ways for a dime. The place wasn't named with sardonic intent. To them, the name literally said what it meant. This was, after all, where the terminal was, and the dactyl in terminal pleased them because it mimicked the clickety-clack of the track that lullabied babies to sleep going back. And right in the center, a marvel was set. The engines were turned in a slow pirouette on a platform that carried the giants with ease in an arc of 180 degrees. But ironies happen. The auto age came and abandonment wrought a new turn on the name. The literal iron was scrapped and the place was left unattended, a terminal case. Now derelicts shiver by fires in the dark with no return tickets from Terminal Park. And today is Dante Day. After Brian's reading, we didn't plan this, but it happens that I have a Dante poem as well. This is called Dante's House. On a mid-December night, I went astray in the streets of Florence, dark and serpentine, an underworld of winding way on way. Lost in the realm of Guelph and Ghibelline, I abandoned hope of finding my way back by signs in undecipherable Florentine. A swarm of Vespas ripsawed through the black piazza, spewing the sulfur stench of hell. But by their bug-eyed lights, I saw a plaque in English and Italian, placed to tell a lost soul, this was Dante's house. And clear and close, I heard our Duomo's vesper bell. The church and poet told me I was near the safety I had wandered from alone. The night's despair began to disappear. I lit upon a footpath I had known by day and came full circle through the night to see across a square of cobblestone the steady beacon of our window light. This poem is called Pilgrims. Another mile, another low-rent shrine, your seatmate mumbles. Half the tour group stays, but you lurch down the aisle to get in line. A bus you've been one stop behind for days pulls out, and you see weary faces pass like pilgrims grimly bent on plodding on. There's you, reflected darkly in the glass. Before you recognize yourself, you're gone. Exhaust fumes spiral toward the overcast. You see a peasant in the distance stop his ox to let a tractor lumber past, axle deep in some anemic crop. The toilet shelter reeks. You turn away and shuffle with the line that snakes inside the sanctum, where some sooty mosaics portray creation myths, according to the guide. The driver beeps. You decline to buy a postcard, but from the corner of your eye, you glimpse a swath of tile rubbed clean, a blue as undefiled as Eden's morning sky. This poem is called Verses on Mutability, with a line from Ecclesiastes, and there's no prize for spotting the line from Ecclesiastes except the satisfaction. I found a rundown storage shack that stood where rows of fruit trees had been overrun, hemmed in and held up by the cottonwood and birches that obscured the orchard sun. The handmade "Keep Out" sign was weather-streaked in faded hunter green and nailed askew above the gaping door. The hinges creaked but seemed to croak, "Come in," as I passed through. The smell of leaves outside gave way inside to dust where spider webs had claimed the place. Now knots of myths and flies hung mummified and swayed as silk strands broke across my face. A winter storm had torn away a square of roof, allowing sun and seeds to seize the spot beneath and start a forest there of sallow grass and tortuous knee-high trees. Men come and go, but earth abides, they say, to overgrow an orchard and a shack. If I should go but to return someday, I'd find no trace of them on coming back. For the younger members of the audience, this poem involves Sputnik. My earliest datable memory happens to be of the launch of Sputnik, which was in 1957, October of 1957, and it was a very big deal because it meant the Russians could deliver an atomic bomb. And also that we were behind. And so, of course, from that point on, every young man had to become an engineer or explain why he wasn't. This is called Fellow Traveler. I'm 5 years old, a late October night. My father wakes me, takes me by the hand. In robes and slippers, we go outside to stand on dew-chilled grass to see, high up, a light that moves and moves. It's 1957. My father says the Russians have leapt ahead by building missiles instead of baking bread, and godless souls have marred the face of heaven. Although I'll come to question what I'm told through shifting constellations of belief, that strange word, Sputnik, always brings a brief but heart-deep stab, a remnant of the cold, a vision of the new star far and high that traced its arc against the silent sky. And a number of these poems are set in rural places. I have had the pleasure and labor of working on farms at various times in my life, especially as a kid. Working alone and doing that kind of work that's precious, I think, because it actually has a conclusion, unlike so much work. This is called the work of darkness. Beneath the windrow trees, he found them dead where he had come to scythe the August grass. Birds, no, parts of birds, a wing, a head, a mutilated breast at every pass. Their kind or number the boy would never know, so torn and scattered, as if an airborne flock were blown to pieces, struck a mortal blow beyond the speed and strength of any hawk, and left uneaten here. What bird of prey would waste its kill? The rot his blade revealed was dark and vile against the sweet decay of last year's leaves and this year's clover field. The boy was only 10, and in the dim demonic light, made darker by the glare outward, the senseless slaughter weighed on him and drove him out to uncorrupted air. The harvest done, he came back to that place to grasp this first of countless mysteries. He found the ants and flies had left no trace of stench to taint the rising autumn breeze. And speaking of work in rural places, one of the great things if you're a kid working on a farm is that you get to drive big, heavy equipment, much younger than your friends do. You get to be really, feels great for a while. This is called To Market, To Market. At 13, I was big enough to man a truck at harvest time. It took strong arms to steer the rutted gravel road that ran to the railhead past a dozen miles of farms. While smaller neighbor boys I knew were stuck with children's chores when even in their teens, I pulled a cloud of dust behind my truck and saw them pulling weeds and picking beans. If you can swagger sitting down, I did. I gunned the engine, shifted gears, and thought I surely was the envy of any kid at stoop work in his mother's garden plot. A few short months I drove the countryside, perched high and mighty in a truck that bore, whatever else, a bumper crop of pride that I would never find a market for. And Rob, I neglected to note what time I began. Will you give me a cutoff signal when it?
I mean, you could, a couple more. Fine, yeah.
Well, let me know when I'm.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay. So this poem is called Undivided. I realized some years ago that some of the most important things I learned about teaching, I learned from my dog when I was a kid. And the most important thing I learned from my dog was that when he wanted to play, you either played or you got out of there. You could not be unengaged or disengaged or uninvolved when my dog was around and when he wanted to play. So this poem is called Undivided. A blur of black lab rockets off the dock to hit the water 10 feet out and cast a cloud of crystals skyward in a shock of broken rainbows whirling from the blast. The dog desires no greater good in all the world than this, to run and leap and swim so wholly focused on a rubber ball that bobs away on waves ahead of him. He closes on it with a final surge and arcs his course to home in on a boy who's waiting on the bank where he'll emerge as 50 pounds of single-minded joy. In years of emptiness and artifice, the man the boy becomes will think of this. One of the things that you can't help pondering, I can't help pondering, is what things could have made a difference, what things did make a difference in our lives. I was in the first draft lottery, whatever year that was, and every young man of draft age in America was watching the TV that night as they actually drew the numbers from the cylinder and and you found out what sequence you were going to go in. And by the luck of the draw, it was determined whether you would be drafted, whether you might be drafted, or whether you had no chance of being drafted. I had no chance of being drafted. Good friends were. This poem is called Divergence. He calls me when he's had too much to drink at 3 a.m. Behind his voice, I hear a bottle kiss a glass with a stuttering clink. He likes to talk about our junior year. He talks of far more girls than I recall, more staggering home at dark, more missing at dawn, more missing class. I nod. It was the 60s after all. I let the most unlikely stories pass. We didn't see it then, the great divide ahead, but who at 21 foresees how whimsically the gods or fates decide the twisting courses of our histories? My number wasn't called, his was. His war, my college, took us down divergent streams. He calls my number when he's grasping for the strength to swim against his troubled dreams. And so our one-way conversation goes, those half-invented fantasies of his across the years and miles, as if to close the gap between what might have been and is. This poem is called The Nature of Things. Some more classics sneaking in. The dozen horses make a writhing knot against this afternoon of windblown sleet. Driven to preserve their vital heat, they nose and jostle for the inmost spot. If we had thought the storm would reach this height, we would have brought them in this morning. Instead, we'll slog into a muddy winter night to get the last one trailered, stalled, and fed. For now, my pickup cab is warm and dry. Through a 1/4 inch of windshield glass, I see the chaos swirling down the sky to blast the horse's involuting mass. Lucretius says they're particles in flux from form to form, and so's the storm. And I'm involved, I guess, as I wait for the trucks and watch my wipers measure off the time. Is there time for another one?
Yeah, another one. Then we'll
One
wrap up.
more. Okay, we'll finish with, this is a little bit lighter. This is called Driving Backwards. He bought a car when he retired, just like the ones that he admired in high school, like the cool guys had. His wife says, fine, but doesn't add that her date for junior prom drove one. Well, she thinks what's done is done. They didn't know each other then. She's too aware how fragile men can be about a thing like that. But riding beside him, where she sat beside that boy, she feels the past beside her coming back, and fast. He dated her junior year, reached second base in second gear, and later in the drive-in's dark reached third, and then stole home in park. She feels a long forgotten thrill recalling how he groped until she helped him get her bra unclasped, and things he much more quickly grasped. A quick glance at the back seat shows the place she lost her pantyhose that night, and that's not all by far. Her husband proudly drives the car, completely unaware she's sure of where the car is taking her. That night, it seems as if the cold, dead hand of habit doesn't hold them quite so tightly. Even though it's been a week or so since they made love, they're at it now in ways they had forgotten how, indulging every sharpened sense. They're 60 in experience, but 17 again, entwined, adventurous, and rubber-spined. Is he so vainly masculine he thinks he knows what's gotten into her? No point explaining it if both enjoy the benefit of his nostalgic automobile. She can't help thinking how the wheel of time turns unexpectedly to carry us to places we believed we had been driven from. Perhaps he too was back in some ideal scene of high school love that he has never told her of. The past is past indeed, and yet some things our bodies don't forget. And thank you all again. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you, Richard, very much. Wonderful reading. And I'd like to have everyone who wants to
Terrific,
show.
terrific. Nice, very terrific.
Very nice. Very good. Thank you.
Nice.
Very nice.
Very good, very good. Yes, and we'll open for comments and questions. Actually, I have something I'd like to run by our readers. First of all, wonderful, wonderful reading. And I have to say that when I asked the writers in what order they'd like to read today, Bill Baer wrote back saying, as I'm the only one who's reading detective fiction, put me in between these two distinguished poets. And hearing that, it occurred to me that there were many similarities between the genres of formal poetry and detective fiction. In a sonnet, for instance, a case is presented, poet hopes to win or restore love, evidence is given, then about 2/3 of the way in, there's a turn, which throws light on what came before, and the conclusions of both detective stories and poems should be aesthetically and intellectually satisfying. I think that all three writers reading today, do that brilliantly. And I was wondering, William, since you've enjoyed success in both genres, if you think I want to comment on that idea, or am I, as Jack Colt might say, just blowing smoke?
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, the formality of the poems that most of us like, I don't know everybody out there, but is very similar to the carefully plotted story or novel or play or whatever. So yes, I think that's very true. I mean, when I was a little boy in the Bronx, I was there till I was 12, and Poe's house was, the cottage was nearby. And so I read Poe very, very early. And, he wrote this beautiful, very often tightly constructed poetry. And then he wrote these amazing stories and, of course, invented the detective stories. So, yeah, I do think all of this stuff is intertwined. And I just feel blessed that I can write any kind of silly nonsense I want.
Yes, I also think that, the conclusion of the detective story, as I said, should be intellectually satisfying and aesthetically satisfying, or it's a disappointment to me, at least. And I think Brian and Richard both really do well in concluding their poems and throwing light back on what preceded what came before. I know many times reading both of their works in the material that Alex had given me to preview this, to prepare. It was like there were wow moments, like, yes, that's that really it just nails it. So.
What else?
There's also, just to remind people, that Richard Hugo wrote a detective novel, Death and the Good Life. So it's an intersection between poetry and detective novels. Thank you.
Yes, and Auden confessed in The Guilty Vicarage that he loved detective.
Yeah, his friend C.D. Lewis wrote mysteries. Sorry, Brian.
No, I was going to say that there's a similarity between them, in that when the poet finishes the poem, concludes the poem, there's a mystery there too. How did I arrive at that place? There's a good book on Borges called The Mystery to the Solution. And I think that one could apply that title to the experience of writing a poem and reading a poem, that the solution somehow escapes one's full understanding and remains a mystery.
Borges would be a good example of someone who wrote well as well.
Yeah, but I must say for myself, Borges was Better shut up.
Hello. Hello. I love the poems about Don. Oh, forget it. This is gonna happen. Is it? Anyway, right. I've not enjoyed hearing. Is this working, folks? Never mind.
Brian, you need to unmute yourself.
Me? Is that better?
Yes.
Does that make me able to talk to you now?
Yes, that works now.
Oh, wow. Okay. I was very interested about Kafka's little stick drawings in the margins because I'm working on another descendant of White Wells Petrarch. And when I look at old manuscripts, they can have what I would have thought of as a sacred text when I was growing up. And then they have these perverted little pictures of devils and animals and doing sometimes very horrible things. And I kind of thought about that as, is that the same way that I feel about, city lights and music coming at you from this direction and TV from that just this stuff that we're always bombarded with. If that, I don't know, how does that affect you?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Just seeing a likeness between Kafka's figures. What do you think that Kafka's figures express with?
Okay. Well, that is an interesting question. I have no idea, but I do remember reading in, I think, Max Brode's biography of Kafka that his friends, Kafka would read aloud his stories to his friends, and they were kind of taken aback by some of the things they heard, but they were also taken aback by the fact that Kafka laughed a lot at his own writing. And I think that's kind of an interesting element to it, Did that answer your question?
A part of it, but other people should ask you other questions. Thank you.
Rob, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Hey, I'm sorry I missed Brian's reading, but I had a question for Richard. I think your use of rhyme is very good. It proves that in the 21st century we can use rhyme and it sound natural and be appropriate to our time period. And I just wondered, with your experience, do you most often find that your poems kind of find their final form, within 2 or 3 drafts, or is it more common for you to, write a draft, set it aside, maybe 2 years, you come back, you kind of refashion some things? I was just curious if you don't mind sharing what your experience is on that.
I don't mind at all. Once in a while, of course, you get lucky and a poem takes form fairly quickly. Typically, that turns out not to be a particularly good poem later on, after you get over the thrill of just having finished it. Sometimes there's just a tremendous amount of time involved. For example, that title poem, Terminal Park, I first wrote, well over 20 years ago, and it's been published 3 different times in 3 different forms, struggling to find the shape that would fit. For example, originally it was in iambic pentameter instead of anapestic tetrameter. The rhyme scheme was different. The whole deal was different. Eventually you give up. what the rhyme does for me, and meter to a lesser extent, but rhyme for me, is that it means that my first impulse almost never works, and that's good, because the fact is that our culture, the zeitgeist, writes poems for us. If we were to decide to write a poem about Ukraine, if that were our assignment, we would all, in a matter of minutes, turn out the same exact poem, pretty much. And what rhyme does is make me have to go back and back and back and back. I don't know if it works that way for other people, but it does for me. I have to reach deeper. I have to look more broadly. I have to make more connections than my lazy cognitive proclivities would ordinarily lead me to.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
Sure.
I found, Richard, that when I write in rhyme, it's as if I'm in partnership with the language in a way that I'm not when I'm writing free verse. It's like a friend of mine describes it as like having a dance partner, where the rhyme takes you in places that you wouldn't normally go. And I find that's true.
Well, I can, or to indulge a pun, I've thought at times that trying to rhyme is like you put a bit of bait at the end of a line and toss it into the great lexicon, the vast, broad lexicon of the language, and hope that it pulls something back, hope that something bites. And as with most fishing expeditions, it can take a lot of casting.
That's a better analogy, I think. Please speak up if you got a question. I might not be able to see everyone who might have their hand up or have a question.
I was curious, Mr. Baer, since he is a kind of ambidextrous, working between prose and poetry, does he feel like there's a different process for him when he's composing a poem as opposed to plotting out and working ahead in his novel or short story?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. I also write plays and songs and all kinds of stuff. And the truth is, I have kind of basic same procedure for all of it. I mean, it may sound ridiculous, but I outline even sonnets. I mean, I actually write sonnets backwards because I love sonnets. To me, sonnets are like the greatest thing in the world. And I tend to almost always, unless I'm translating and have no choice, to use the English sonnet for that wonderful couplet at the end. So I usually write, I already know what the sonnet is in my head, so I go to the end to make sure I'm satisfied with it, because if I can't get the end, then why would I write the rest of it? So I'm a very careful outliner about everything I do, and the actual writing happens pretty quickly. And I'm sure a lot of you, doesn't mean you don't go back and struggle with things and everything, but I mean, I've been doing it since I was a kid, so I kind of know what I want to do. And as long as I have it outlined, whatever it is, I follow that outline, and things will change as I go along. But basically, to answer your question, it's kind of the same procedure for me.
Yes, I would second that as a translator, because the content is pretty much given. So, you do have to get to that last line, and mine's already there. So same thing.
I attempted to translate, and the book was published, the Luís de Camões, the great Portuguese sonneteer from the Renaissance.
Oh, okay.
And I agree with you entirely. Why would I? It was hard enough doing it, and I'm sure I made a disaster of a lot of it. But why would I even attempt the rest of it if I couldn't get something that I felt was appropriate to his ending right? So I always began at the end. So enough of that.
I have a comment and a question.
Fire away.
The comment is to William, Bill. I also lived across from Folk Cottage, and one of the nice things. Am I on an echo? By dollar savings on the Grand Concourse, and the next building, the bar was called Poe's Cozy Nook, that you walk down into. My question to all three is, you seem, each of you in your own way seems surprised by experience. Are you surprised by where the experience takes you when you're doing the writing? Either the incident that you have focused on, or the moment that just comes out of nowhere. At least that's what I'm seeing.
For me, yes, there's often a surprise of what things turn out to mean, things that I could not have anticipated. However, the surprise often is much delayed. So, and that may be one of the reasons that almost all of my poems are written in past tense. They're as much about contemplating an experience at a great remove. As Wordsworth said, he didn't just say over a spontaneous overflow of emotion. He said recollected in tranquility. And we tend to forget that part. And it's much, much later, and sometimes many, many drafts and many, many years later, before that experience really yields up its surprises fully. And so one of the pleasures, maybe sometimes hazards of being a writer, is that constant, at least opportunity for rediscovery or for discovery of something in the past that just had lain there latent for so long.
Great, thanks.
Well, I think it was Frost who likened writing a poem to watching ice cube melt on a hot skillet and make a certain form, and you can't project where it's going to go. That's an interesting metaphor, I think.
Yeah.
The surprise is at the end, and you have a puddle of water on the skillet.
And Bill, you mentioned that you plot everything, including the sonnet. Are you surprised by the backward work as well? Like that is, you have an ending, but does where it begins end up surprising you?
Well, kind of all the words surprise me, but like I said, I have a very general idea of the flow of the thing before I go to the end and make sure I can get that to my satisfaction. That doesn't mean that things don't change. I mean, I'm not locked into myself.
No. I wasn't suggesting that. I wasn't suggesting. What I mean is like surprised by it takes you someplace that you really didn't expect you were going there.
All the time, but a lot of that for me happens before. Wasn't it Croce that talked about whether the work of art is really in your head before you put it down or painted or whatever? Now we know in the process of that, all kinds of things happened and changed and can be edited and all kinds of stuff. But for me, I've just, I guess ever since I was a little boy in the Bronx, I've formulated, watching Twilight Zone, formulating these things in my head, Incidentally, I grew up on University Avenue, right next to Tolentine there in the Bronx.
I went to Cardinal Hayes.
No, the other direction, over towards the Harlem River there. And I left at 12, so I wasn't going to any bars, so I don't know that far.
I went to Cardinal Hayes High School in the Bronx.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you.
There's a comment I'd like to make to basically pitch to Brian. A poem you didn't read today, but I was very impressed with, and as was Mark Jarman, no no mean poet himself, the Amphora, where you described a fault and that led you into to imagine the life of the person who was carrying this vessel and caused the star fracture. A wonderful phrase. And it thought, and I remembered the Auden line about cracking the teacup opens the land of the dead. But you were going into life instead of the ending of life. You were imagining a life lived. And I was just, I love that poem. And I thought how often faults in characters or situations lead us in, or the way in, or the door into our work, our stories and poems. I wondered if you want to comment on that. It's a little unfair since you didn't read it, but today. But
yeah, yeah. Just when we look at a piece of an ancient vase in a museum or Renaissance, whatever it is, we tend not to contemplate the story behind it, behind its fashioning. And so the poem takes place, as you say, in that crack in the vase, and what caused it, the etiology of, if you were, as it were, and it actually is a slave who is thinking about how he was captured, and hits against the door lintel and cracks the vase, and then understands that the master is going to come and see the crack, and he will be punished. Yeah, that was the idea behind the poem, and thanks for liking it. Yeah.
Terrific poem, yeah. Well, we're about at the hour that we were anticipating closing today. I would like to thank everyone who showed up for this wonderful reading, participated. I would love, love to be back here with all of you again. Thank you, Brian, William, and Richard for sharing your work with us. I look forward to reading your collections, as I'm sure everyone does here. Thank you, Alex, for providing the format here, and everyone who asked such interesting questions. And with that, I guess I'd invite you to unmute yourselves for one big round of applause to send us home.
Yay.
Hey, bravo.
Hi, Wendy.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you, Bill, Brian, and Richard. And thank you, Rob. Good hosting job. And don't forget to pick up a book from one of our readers today. From our readers today, not one, from all our readers today.
Bravo, everyone.
Thank you. Terrific.
Thank you.
And for reviewers among you, just email us for the review copy of any of the books. You can go to the website and you can use the contact from the ablemuse.com.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.